So next up, we're going to add the ability for our users to attend activities. So let's go ahead and do this. And we'll start off with the handler for this. So in the application, in the activities, I'm just going to create a new C# class and just call this attend. And this is going to be a command handler because we're changing the states of our application. So I'm just going to use the C handler snippet we created earlier. And inside here, I'm just going to bring in all of the different properties we need for this. So bring in persistence, bring in system threading, same for cancellation token, and same for the exception and using system. And I'll just reformat. And what we want to do inside here, we're going to need to get the ID of the activity, and we'll pass that through as a root parameter. So we'll have access to it inside here. So I'll add a GUID and call it ID, which is going to represent our activity ID. And then inside the handler, what we'll also need access to is the user's username that we get from the token. And for that, we'll need to use our user accessor and call it user accessor. And just bring in application interfaces and also initialize the field from parameter. And I'll just take out this dot. So let's have a think about what we need to do inside here. First of all, we'll need to get our activity and we'll need to get our user. So let's first of all get our activity. So we'll say var activity equals await, and then we'll say context.activities, and we'll use the find async and use the request ID to get the specific activity here. And if we don't find an activity in our database with this particular key, then it's going to return null. So we should check to see if the activity is null. And if it is, then what we'll do is we'll throw a new REST exception. And we'll need to bring in application errors. And we'll say HTTP status code and bring in system.net. And we'll just use the not found in this case. And we need to give it some object errors, and in this case we'll say new, and we'll say activity equals could not find activity. And I'll just reformat slightly. And what we want to do next is get the user object, so we'll say var user equals await context dot users, and then we'll need to use single or default async, and we can't use find async for this one because our username is not the primary key of our users database or our ASP.NET users database. And then we can say in the expression that the username is equal to, and we'll say user accessor dot get current username. And I'll just bring this down. Now if we don't have a token for our user, then we're not even going to get to this stage, so we're going to get an unauthorized request. So it's not really necessary to check to see if we've got a user at this stage, because to get here we're going to have a user token, and then we'll be able to get the username from that token. So it shouldn't be necessary to do a check here to see if the user is null or not. Although it wouldn't do any harm to do the check, but I'm going to not do that. And then what we want to get is the attendance. So we'll say var attendance equals await and context dot user activities dot single or default async, and then in the expression we'll say x.activity ID is equal to activity.id, and the x.appUserID is equal to the user.id. And that needs to be a capital I for ID. and see if I can rearrange this a little bit better. Okay, so what we want to check to see if this is null, and if it is null, then we're going to create a new attendance that will add to our user activity. So below this, we'll say if attendance, and we'll check to see if it's not equal to null. And if it is not equal to null, that means the user is already attending this activity. So what we'll do is we'll throw a new REST exception. And we'll say HTTP status code.bad request. And we'll say new. And attendance equals already attending this activity as the message. And just bring that down as well. So if we get to this stage, then what we want to do is create the new attendance. So we'll say attendance is equal to a new user activity and just bring in domain. And then we just need to specify the activity is equal to activity, the app user is equal to user, the isHost property, because this is just a normal attendance, will be false, and the date joined will be equal to datetime dot now. And then what we can do is say underscore context user activities dot adds, and then just pass in the new attendance that we've created here. And the rest of this stays the same. We still want to save our changes to the database, and if successful, then we're just going to return from this particular method. And then we can create the method in the activities controller, and we'll add a new HTTP post method. We'll just add it at the bottom, and we'll say HTTP post, and we need to provide the ID, which is going to be the activity ID, and we'll say public async task of action results, and we'll just use unit as normal, and we'll just say attend and pass in the GUID ID that we get from our root parameter. And then all we need to do is say return await mediator.send, and the root parameter also needs a attend after the ID as well, otherwise we're going to conflict with something else. So with this HTTP post, we need the ID of the activity /attend, and that will be the API endpoints, the root, so that we can hit this particular method. And then in our mediator send, we can say new attend.command, and we'll use the object initializer to say the ID is equal to ID. And what we can do now is test this functionality. So let's head back to Postman. And what we've got in here is a request to add an attendance as Bob. And what we'll do, we'll need to get an ID of an activity that Bob is not attending at the moment. So I'm just going to click on Get Activities. And I'll just pick the very first activity in the list, the past activity 1. And I'll just copy this GUID into my clipboard. And then go ahead and in the Add Attendance as Bob, I'm just going to overwrite the GUID that's in there and paste in the one from my clipboard. And this is using the token that we've already saved inside our environment variables. And inside the test for this, we're just checking to make sure the response is a 200. And there's no body that goes up with this particular request. And if we click on send, then we get a 200 OK response back from the server. And if we go ahead and get the activity details, and I just paste in the GUID for the past activity 1 that we're working with, and click send, then we can see the past activity 1 now has an attendee, which is Bob, and the isHost is set to false. And we'll obviously see this inside the list of activities as well, and indeed we do. So now that we can attend an activity, we also want the users to be able to remove themselves from that activity as well. And we'll take a look at that next.